It is 1920, and somewhere in New York City, a man named Harold is sitting at the head of a long mahogany dining table. He has built everything from nothing. A textile empire. 2 townhouses. A stock portfolio that would make most men weep with envy. He raises a glass and tells his 3 sons, one day, all of this will be yours. And he means every word. Fast forward 30 years. Harold is gone. His sons have split the business in 3, argued over the townhouses, and made a series of decisions that would have broken their father's heart. By 1960, the fortune is largely gone. By 1980, Harold's grandchildren are living ordinary middle-class lives with no idea that their grandfather once commanded real power and real wealth. This is not a unique story. In fact, it is one of the most common stories in human history. And yet, almost nobody talks about why it keeps happening, generation after generation, culture after culture, century after century. Today, we are going to talk about it. We are going to pull back the curtain on the real mechanics of generational wealth, not the Instagram version, not the motivational poster version, but the deep, historically grounded truth about why wealth gets built, why it gets lost, and what the families who actually managed to keep it across generations did differently. Stay with me, because what we are about to explore is going to change the way you think about money, family, and legacy forever. Let us start with a number that should genuinely disturb you. 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the 2nd generation. 70%. That is not a fringe statistic, that is the overwhelming norm. And if you extend the timeline out just one more generation, the number climbs to 90%. 9 out of 10 wealthy family lines wiped out financially within 3 generations. There is even a phrase for it that has appeared in cultures all over the world, completely independently. In America, they say shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The English say clogs to clogs. The Chinese have a proverb that translates roughly to wealth never survives 3 generations. The Japanese, the Scots, the Italians, they all arrived at the same observation without ever talking to each other. That kind of cultural convergence means we are looking at something deeply human, not something accidental. So the first question we have to ask is, why? Why does this happen so consistently? The answer is probably not what you think. When most people hear that a wealthy family lost everything, they imagine bad investments, a market crash, a business that failed. And yes, those things happen, but here is the staggering truth. Researchers who have studied failed family wealth found that 85% of the time, the cause was not financial at all. It was human. Read that again. 85% of the time, the wealth did not fail because of the market. It failed because of the people. Specifically, about 60% of failures come down to a breakdown in trust and communication within the family. Brothers who stopped talking. A parent who kept financial secrets. A family that never developed the language or the culture to talk openly about money, and so when the money arrived, they had no framework to manage it together. Another 25% of failures trace back to heirs who simply were not prepared. Children and grandchildren who inherited resources they had never been taught to understand. Imagine handing a race car to someone who has never learned to drive. The car is not the problem. The driver is the problem. This changes everything about how we should think about building wealth for future generations. Because if the enemy is primarily human, if it lives inside relationships and culture and education, then the solution has to address those things directly. It cannot just be about picking the right stocks. The families who have successfully passed wealth across multiple generations, and they do exist, some going back hundreds of years, seem to understand something that most people miss entirely. They understand that wealth is not one thing. It is actually 5 things. Think of it this way. The first, and most obvious, is financial capital. This is what we typically picture. Cash, investments, real estate, business equity. It is the scoreboard that most people focus on exclusively. But then there is human capital. This is the health, education, work ethic, and raw earning potential within your family. A family that produces doctors, engineers, and entrepreneurs generation after generation is a wealthy family even if their bank balance dips from time to time. Then there is social capital. The relationships. The networks. The knowing someone who knows someone. The doors that open not because of your resume but because of who raised you and who your family has built trust with over decades. Underestimate this one at your peril. Social capital is often what keeps financial capital from disappearing in the first place. Fourth is intellectual capital. The collective knowledge within a family about how money actually works. How investing works. How compounding works. How to read a balance sheet. How to evaluate risk. This is distinct from formal education. You can have a PhD and still have zero financial intellectual capital. And the fifth, which most people skip entirely, is what we might call legacy capital. The shared values. The family stories. The sense of identity and purpose that holds people together across time and distance. Families that maintain a clear sense of who they are and what they stand for tend to make better decisions, communicate better, and protect their assets with more intention. Here is the crucial insight: financial capital without the other four is extraordinarily fragile. It is like building a skyscraper without a foundation. It looks impressive right up until the moment it collapses. The old families who kept wealth, the great merchant dynasties of Renaissance Florence, the landed English gentry who survived centuries of upheaval, the American industrialist families who are still prominent today, they all invested, perhaps unknowingly, in all five forms of capital simultaneously. They did not just leave money. They left a culture. Now, let us get into the actual mechanics. Because understanding why wealth fails is only half the puzzle. We need to understand how the builders did it, the actual vehicles and strategies that create durable financial foundations. The first and most fundamental pillar is financial education, and I want you to understand why this comes before everything else. Money without education will always find its way out of your family. It is not a question of if. It is a question of when. Think about the lottery winners of the last few decades. The data on this is remarkable and a little heartbreaking. A significant percentage of lottery jackpot winners are broke within 5 years. Not because they are bad people. Because they received financial capital with zero accompanying intellectual capital. The money had no container to live in. The great wealth-building families throughout history understood this instinctively. The Rothschild, arguably the most successful banking family in modern history, placed an enormous emphasis on financial education starting in childhood. The patriarch Meyer Amschel Rothschild did not just build a bank, he built a curriculum. He taught his sons not just how to earn money but how to think about money, how to move it, how to protect it. You do not need to be a Rothschild to apply this principle. The research on financial education suggests that the earlier you introduce concepts around money, even using something as simple as 3 physical jars for spending, saving, and giving, the more naturally children develop healthy financial instincts. They also pay attention to what you model. If they watch you spend impulsively and avoid talking about finances, that is their education whether you intended it or not. The second great pillar of generational wealth, stretching back literally thousands of years, is real estate. There is a reason the phrase land is the only thing that lasts has echoed through so many cultures in so many centuries. The Romans understood it. The feudal lords of medieval Europe understood it. The colonial plantation owners understood it, as did the great railroad barons of the American West. Real estate does something remarkable that almost no other asset class does. It builds wealth in multiple directions at the same time. The tenant pays down your mortgage, so you are acquiring an asset without spending your own cash. The property appreciates over time, slowly but relentlessly, in almost any market over a long enough horizon. It generates cash flow in the present. It offers substantial tax advantages that most ordinary wage earners never access. And it allows leverage, meaning you can control a $400,000 asset with $80,000 of your own money, amplifying your returns in ways that a simple savings account never could. The concept of house hacking, buying a multi-unit property, living in one unit, and renting the others to cover your mortgage, is not a modern invention. People have been doing versions of this for centuries. It is one of the most time-tested entry points into real estate wealth that exists, and it remains accessible to ordinary people with ordinary incomes today. The third pillar is business ownership and equity. And I want to be precise here, because there is a version of business ownership that builds wealth and a version that traps you. The difference is this: does the business work when you are not there? A self-employed person who cannot take a month off without the business collapsing has not built a wealth vehicle. They have built a very demanding job. The business owner whose company generates revenue through systems, teams, and processes that function independently of any single person, that person has built something that can actually be transferred, scaled, and sold. The great family business dynasties of history understood this. The Medici banking empire of 15th century Florence did not thrive because Lorenzo de' Medici personally handled every transaction. It thrived because the Medicis built networks of branch managers and agents and accounting systems that operated at scale. They owned the system. The system generated the wealth. If you are building a business today, the goal is not just to be good at what you do. The goal is to document what you do, hire people who can do it, create the systems that let them do it consistently, and then own the thing that owns the process. That is the difference between a job and an asset. The fourth pillar, and arguably the most passive of all, is the stock market, specifically, broad market index investing. And I want to say something here that might surprise you given the flashier options we have discussed. Do not underestimate boring. The S&P 500, the index that tracks the 500 largest publicly traded American companies, has returned roughly 10% per year on average over the last century, through wars, depressions, pandemics, and political upheavals. And here is what that number means in practice. A 25-year-old who invests $500 a month in a low-cost index fund and never touches it will have more money at 65 than most people who spent their careers trying to beat the market through active stock picking. The cost of a 10-year delay on this kind of investing, when you account for compound interest, can literally be the difference between hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars at retirement. The families who quietly automated this kind of investing generation after generation built an enormous cushion of wealth almost by accident. Now, the fifth pillar is one that wealthy families have always understood and ordinary families almost never think about: tax strategy. And I am not talking about anything sketchy. I am talking about using the legal framework exactly as it was designed to be used. The wealthy pay lower effective tax rates than many middle-class earners because they earn income through capital gains, which are taxed at preferential rates, rather than through wages. They use real estate depreciation to offset income on paper that does not actually cost them anything. They use structures like donor-advised funds to get immediate tax deductions on charitable giving while distributing the money over time. They use Roth IRA accounts to grow money completely tax-free, and then pass those accounts to their children as a tax-free inheritance. The 1031 exchange, a provision that allows a real estate investor to sell one property and roll the proceeds into a new one without paying capital gains tax, has allowed families to compound their real estate wealth for decades without the government taking a cut at each transaction. Some families have used this tool to defer taxes essentially indefinitely across multiple generations. None of this is exotic. None of it requires a Manhattan law firm. It requires understanding the rules and working with professionals who know how to apply them. The sixth pillar is legal structures, and this is where a lot of people's eyes glaze over, but stay with me, because this is where you actually protect everything you have built. There is a difference between building wealth and keeping wealth. Lawsuits, divorces, creditors, probate courts, these are all forces that can reach into what you have built and pull it apart if you have not structured things correctly. The limited liability company, or LLC, has become the basic unit of asset protection for modern wealth builders. It separates your personal assets from your business liabilities in a way that protects both. The revocable living trust is how families bypass the probate court system, a process that is public, slow, and expensive, and instead transfer assets to their heirs privately and efficiently. For larger estates, irrevocable life insurance trusts and dynasty trusts allow families to pass wealth to multiple future generations while minimizing estate taxes and protecting assets from the kinds of claims and disputes that tend to tear families apart after a patriarch or matriarch dies. These are not tools of the ultra-rich alone. They are available to anyone willing to spend a few hours with a qualified estate planning attorney. And yet, the majority of families never do it, leaving their heirs to fight through the probate system and losing a significant chunk of their inheritance to fees, delays, and taxes in the process. The seventh pillar is life insurance, but not the way most people think about it. The wealthy use permanent life insurance not primarily as a death benefit, but as a sophisticated financial instrument. One of the more interesting strategies is sometimes called the infinite banking concept, which involves using a specially designed whole life insurance policy to build a pool of cash value that you can borrow against tax-free. You essentially become your own bank, financing your own investments in business ventures with your own capital and repaying it on your own terms. It is a strategy that some of the most prominent families in American history, including several old banking dynasties, used quietly for generations. Life insurance also serves a critical function in estate equalization, particularly for families that have a closely held business as their primary asset. If you have 3 children and you want to leave the business to the child who has been working in it, life insurance can provide equivalent inheritances to the other 2 children without forcing anyone to sell or divide the business itself. Now, knowing all of this is only useful if you know what not to do. And the history of failed family fortunes gives us a very clear list of the most common, most devastating mistakes. The first and most avoidable mistake is having no estate plan. None. No will. No trust. No power of attorney. Every single year, enormous sums of money pass through the probate court system simply because the person who earned that money never got around to filling out the paperwork. It is one of the most expensive forms of procrastination imaginable. The second is lifestyle inflation. This is the quiet killer of wealth that no one talks about loudly enough. Every time your income increases, there is a powerful psychological pull to let your spending increase proportionally. new car, bigger house, better restaurants. And none of those things are inherently wrong, but if your spending habits grow faster than your investment assets, you are moving backward no matter how much you earn. The discipline of keeping your lifestyle relatively stable while your wealth grows is one of the least glamorous but most effective things a person can do. The third mistake is treating money as taboo within the family. Keeping financial matters hidden from your children because you think it is impolite or because you worry it will make them complacent. The data is clear: unprepared heirs lose money. Prepared heirs build on it. Having honest, age-appropriate conversations about money with your children is one of the greatest gifts you can give them. Then there is the mistake of treating a business as a retirement plan. Betting your entire financial future on the assumption that your business will be worth a specific amount when you are ready to sell, a business that, as we discussed, may not be able to function without you at all. Diversification exists for a reason. A business is an asset, but it should be one asset among many, not the whole portfolio. Failing to diversify more broadly is its own category of mistake. Concentration risk, having everything tied up in one stock, one industry, one market, is the financial equivalent of building everything on a single pillar. When that pillar shakes, everything falls. And then there is perhaps the most heartbreaking mistake of all: not preparing heirs. Giving a sudden, enormous inheritance to children or grandchildren who have never been given graduated financial responsibilities is setting them up to fail. The research on sudden inheritance is damning. Without preparation, sudden wealth tends to destroy the recipient's motivation, their relationships, and eventually the wealth itself. Divorce is another factor that almost no wealth-building conversation takes seriously enough. Divorce is statistically one of the single largest destroyers of family wealth, not because love is bad, but because in the absence of proper planning, prenuptial agreements, trust structures, clear ownership documentation, a divorce can unwind in a few months what took decades to build. And finally, short-term thinking. The refusal to make investments or decisions whose payoff is 15, 20, or 30 years away. The great wealth-building families throughout history were comfortable making decisions they knew they would never personally benefit from. They planted trees under whose shade they would never sit. That kind of patient, multi-generational thinking is rare and deeply countercultural in an era of instant everything. But it is the soil from which lasting wealth grows. So what does the path forward actually look like? If you are starting more or less from scratch, here is a honest, sequential framework built on everything we have discussed. In the first couple of years, focus on the foundation. Get a basic estate plan in place: a will, a healthcare directive, a power of attorney. It does not have to be elaborate. It just has to exist. Open a Roth IRA and start contributing to it. Build a 3 to 6 month emergency fund so that financial stress does not derail every other effort you make. And break the money taboo in your family. Start talking about it. In years 3 and 4, start acquiring your first real assets. Look at your first real estate purchase, even if it is modest. Automate your index fund investing so it happens every month without requiring willpower. Form an LLC if you are building any kind of business or rental portfolio. Deepen your financial education relentlessly. From years 5 through 7, the goal is scale and diversification. Expand the real estate portfolio. Work on building your business to the point where it can function without you. Consult with a CPA and an estate planning attorney about whether more advanced trust structures make sense for your situation. Open custodial investment accounts for your children and let them watch the money grow. In years 8 through 10, you start to institutionalize the wealth. Write down your family's financial philosophy. Yes, literally write it down. Hold regular family conversations about money, values, and long-term goals. Look into whether a dynasty trust makes sense for your estate, and begin actively mentoring the next generation with small, real financial responsibilities. Let them make decisions, let them experience consequences, let them learn while the stakes are still low. Here is what history teaches us above everything else. Wealth is not primarily a financial phenomenon. It is a cultural one. The families who sustained prosperity across generations did so not because they were smarter or luckier, but because they built something more durable than a portfolio. They built a shared identity around the intelligent stewardship of resources. They made financial wisdom part of what it meant to belong to their family. Harold, sitting at that mahogany table in 1920, loved his sons. That was never the question. But love without language, without preparation, without structure, is not enough. The wealth he built deserved a better container than silence and assumption. You have the chance to build a different story. One where the generations that come after you do not start from zero. One where the knowledge, the values, and yes, the financial assets, accumulate rather than erode. That story starts now, with the decisions you make this year, this month, this week. If you found value in this conversation, share it with someone who is thinking about their legacy. Leave a comment below about which of these ideas resonated most with you. And subscribe if you want to keep exploring the history and strategy of how real wealth gets built and preserved across time.